everyone, and welcome to Sunday Night Dead. Matthew Sozer here from Automoon Paranormal in beautiful Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Hope you guys all had a great weekend. Thank you for closing it out with me tonight. First weekend of May, one of my favorite months of the year. Tonight, we're talking about a show that is, or a topic that is not for the squeamish. And if you haven't heard about it before, you're going to wonder why you haven't. And that is the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, otherwise known as Unit 731, which rivals some of the most brutal things that ever happened during World War II. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this one, it's a creepy story, but two, I get asked a lot when we do these, particularly on the after show, get asked a lot of questions about, if you could investigate anywhere in the world, where would you go? And, I have this kind of global bucket list of places that you can argue whether, it's insensitive to go there or not. So, I don't know whether, at the end of the day to do it or not, but places that would definitely be haunted if there's anywhere in the planet that is haunted. And this is definitely one of them. This is probably top 5. And you'll figure out why when we start going through it. It's a pretty brutal story and brutal place. But let's get started. So we always kind of, with World War II, because just kind of our Western orientation, we kind of focus a lot more on the European side of things. And so World War II is typically considered to start when the Germans invaded Poland. But some consider the beginning of World War II. Hey, Monica. Hey, Carson. Hey, Mary Beth. Thanks for joining us tonight. Some consider the start of World War II to actually be when the Japanese went to war with China in the mid to early 30s. Now, prior to that, Japan invaded Manchuria in like 1931, 1932, and took that resource-rich area over as a puppet state to fuel resources to build its empire. Hello, Steph. Hello, Beth. And so they had it for a couple of years ahead of time, but then they went to war in, I want to say it was 36 or 37, with China. And so I believe that's the second China-Japan war. And really brutal things happened during this time. This is where we'll do another show in the future on what was done on Nanking. They call it the Rape of Nanking, but just a lot of brutality in what the Japanese did in China. And so around this time, there's another important figure in all this by the name of Shiro Ishii, who did a lot of biological work, did a lot of work with different microbes and biological warfare agents. And an overall theme behind all this is the Empire of Japan considered things that were banned by the Geneva Convention were banned because they were very effective. And so because of that, they had an interest in particularly biological and chemical weapons, which is going to play a big role in this kind of going forward as we go forward on this. So they started with a, sorry, this is like, my shirt's like bugging me. They started with making a facility in Harbin, which is in Manchuria. And this is before Unit 731. And they started doing some of these human experiments here. And at this point, they were doing things like they would feed the people very well. So first of all, what they would do is they would just grab, and this goes throughout the whole thing. They would grab people from the streets for various reasons. And they would want a cross section. So I'm not going to keep reiterating this. So just keep it, or I might a couple times, but just think about this. The experiments they were doing, they wanted to see effects of these different experiments on the human body. And so they wanted to view a bunch of different variables. So they wanted to look at age, sex. So these experiments were done on children. Some were done on infants. They were done on men. They were done on women. They were done on the elderly. They were done on mostly on the Chinese citizens, but any prisoner of war they captured from other nationalities, They would do these tests on. They did a fair amount with Russians. They would capture. So really, really big testing. Now the basic stuff before they started at Unit 731 was hi Christine and hey Katie. What they did in the beginning was they would feed the people, make them very good, and make sure that they were in good health. And then they would do things like slowly drain them of blood, starve them, dehydrate them, and then look at the effects on the body. And how they documented all this. First of all, I want to say hi to Katie and thanks. Hope you have a good night soldering tonight, and good. Hope you enjoy it when you watch the replay tomorrow. What they did, this is the really gross part. How they got all their data was they did live vivisections on the people without anesthetic. So basically, they would dehydrate or starve somebody for a certain length of time, and then go ahead and I got some questions in the chat that I'll get to in a second. They would go ahead and do these vivisections and look at the effect of dehydration, blood loss on the different organs. They're going to do this for these other things we're going to talk about too. This is just, these are the people that had this happen to them. This is like the nice stuff. Monica, this happened in China in the late 30s, beginning of World War II, but went through all the way through. This will go all the way through World War II. So anyway, so then the Zero Ishii got put in charge, I want to say in 1936, 1937. And he got in charge of a much bigger unit called the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, or Unit 731. And the cover story for this is that it was a lumber mill that they were building. And so they referred to the people that went into the location as logs. So one of the phrases then would be like, how many logs fell today? So to help dehumanize, they weren't inmates, they weren't patients, they were referred to as logs. Also, I want to add, so that we know ahead of time, there's no documentation that anyone ever left this place. So this place has 0 survivors. No liberation, no, prisoners here. Like everyone that went, if you went this Unit 731, you died. And relatively quickly. The only people they kept alive were, and we'll get into some of these experiments they did, is if women, if they wanted to see effects of some of these things on pregnancies or on the baby that would be born, they would keep them alive to have the children. But other than that, you didn't live very long at all in this location. So, and again, I'm going to get into some pretty gross stuff. This is still, we're still in the tame stuff right now. Just a warning. So, so as I said, they would capture people off the streets. They wanted a cross section of ages, a cross section of obviously male, female, children, elderly. They did a lot to the Chinese, but they, if they could get a hold of Europeans or other nationalities, they wanted to see if there's any differences in these experiments as well. And so they did lots of different things, and some were for scientific knowledge, human experiments for scientific knowledge. Some things were just outright sadistic and had no scientific basis to them at all. And so some of the things they did before we get into the biowarfare things, just on anatomy type things, is they would amputate limbs and then reattach them on the opposite side of the body. They took out people's stomachs and attached the esophagus directly to the intestines to see what would happen. They did experiments where they would remove partially parts of organs to see the effect on the person. So there's experiments that they documented where they removed part of a person's brain, a part of a person's lung, part of a person's liver, and again, see what would happen with them over time. But again, nobody ever lived for any of these. Then it moved into biological weapons, and that was really what Ishii was very interested in. And the one they did the most work with and did a lot of different experiments with is plague. And so, and he made modified versions of these all. So these were all stronger versions of diseases than what was done naturally. But obviously, the plague has a very horrible reputation, is very nasty. When we did the story on the 5 biggest pandemics, we went into detail on what that does. Oh, Steph, we're going to get there. There's a reason. Steph asked how did these documents of experiments come to light? Yeah, the answer to that question is really, really disturbing, and it also ties into why you hear. And I'm not downplaying Auschwitz or any of these other things. Yeah, we'll get to that stuff. Just I don't want to get too far into. But I'll say there's a reason why you hear all about the German concentration camps. I mean, you don't hear so much about this, but we'll get to that. Yeah, I don't want to give. I'm tempted to give part of it away, but I won't. I'll keep going. So anyway, so they started doing these weapons research, and then he started working on. Well, first they bred fleas, so these plague-infected fleas, and they started releasing them into villages in China, and they created huge outbreaks of the plague. And not only the plague, but a particularly lethal, high death count. Very. There was one report of. We went through it, but one of the things is like wherever you're closest to where the flea bite is, that lymph node gets gigantic. Well, there's like one story of a daughter in the village that in this one village that her lymph node was the size of her head, and she didn't want to get the rest of the family sick, and so like she went out into a field just to like die, so like no other fleas wouldn't bring them into the house or whatever. I mean, they're probably already in the house anyway, but anyway, lots of people dying from this. He then worked on making bombs of putting the fleas in. He wanted to make basically plague bombs, but obviously the fleas wouldn't survive explosions, so they made these kind of bombs, but they were basically clay pots that they would encase the flea or put the fleas in the clay pots and then drop them into areas and have them break and get released. Now, what you may not know is there was a operation called Operation Cherry Blossom at Night, which was Japan's plan to attack the United States, and they were going to attack the United States this way. They were going to bring in the plague-infested rats as well as kind of kamikaze soldiers to be already pre-infected with diseases and get into the area to infect. And they actually did, they did attempt to bring a couple bombs over. They were experimenting with tying things to balloons. And so there were some attempts, but obviously nothing caught on, no epidemics or anything took shape. They also did a lot of experiments on things to kill plants. So that was the other thing they wanted to attack, particularly the United States on, is they wanted to release diseases that would kill our corn and wheat and try to starve us out. So that was something else that he was also working on. But it wasn't just plague. They did experiments with cholera, smallpox, which is particularly nasty, botulism, anthrax, tularemia. All these are biological weapons, or well, not so much cholera, but considered bioweapons. To Steph's point, a lot of this probably is in bioweapons programs because of this work that was done. I will say that this work ends up going places that this knowledge exists to this day. I'll leave it there, and we'll get to the story behind that. But they feel that the estimate is greater than 400,000 people in China died from these plague attacks, disease attacks in general. Something else they did is he had a modified version of typhoid fever. He would go ahead and, or not he, but the Unit 731 folks would poison candy, and they poison water supplies with typhoid or cholera. They would go ahead and make candy and treats that they contaminate with typhoid and hand them out to the villages, hand them out to kids in the villages to have all these outbreaks go out. And then they would have the lab people from Unit 731 study kind of how the outbreak went. So which diseases spread bad or, quickly, could they be contained? What happened to the people, death rates, how disruptive it all was. That's the thing about it. It was very, very methodical. And so it's really interesting. Now I'm just going to contrast. I'm not saying good or bad, but you think about Germany, where they basically just industrialized death. They just wanted to mass kill people. So they were just pushing them through the gas chambers and kind of it. They're taking all the people and they're using them as basically human guinea pigs to get knowledge of different bioweapons and different. So they were using them basically as lab rats, which gets to a part I actually missed. This is the amazing thing. The early work on this, at least the earlier work, I don't know how much it got later, they actually published experiments in peer-reviewed journals that got published. And what they did was they said the experiments were being conducted on Manchurian monkeys or long-tailed monkeys or long-tailed primates. So basically, and again, I don't know. I'll have to dive into more of this. Like, I can't believe that nobody would have picked up on what that was, which kind of bugs me. But so they actually got some of this research published in academic journals, these human experiments saying that they were being done on primates. And so, it's true, Mary Beth. They did do experiments. This is, we'll get into this. This is, some of it's just done to be sadistic, but some of it is very, very methodical. And so I'm going to tee this up again. I need to actually put glass up. There are so many here, and I'll try to elaborate where I can without getting too gross. Keep in mind that that this, again, was done to cross-section of ages, cross-section of not just prisoners of war, but people in the villages. So we're talking men, women, children, elderly, were all experienced. Because again, this was the data they were collecting. They were all subjected to these. Mary Beth, I guess you're asking why they were going to attack America. This was at the end of World War II when, actually it was during World War II, but particularly near the end, when they knew that we were going to eventually be invading Japan, they wanted to try to get us to kind of back off so we could get to some spot where kind of negotiate the peace thing, because the population was kind of on the wall. But anyway, we'll get through all these things. So they did weapons tests. What they would do with the weapons tests is they would take people and they would tie them to stakes at varying distances from the weapon they were going to test. They would have some in uniforms. They would have some naked. They would do varying degrees of coverage for these folks. And then they would test things like hand grenades. So they would throw a hand grenade in this spot. It would blow up, and then they would measure what damage happened to people from different distances from the hand grenades. They did that with flamethrowers. They did that to evaluate shrapnel. They did that to evaluate chemical weapons. I have a list later in here, all the different kind of chemical weapons they used, but mustard gas, which if you're not, Hussein used that in Iraq in the late 80s. It burns, it blisters your body. If you breathe it in, it'll totally blister the inside of your body as well as the outside. Cyanide, I didn't see any reference on nerve gas, so but they very well could have been doing nerve gas stuff. That basically the Nazis came up with that at the same time in Europe, researching for the war. So I don't know. I didn't see any documentation as to how if they were exchanging notes on that Japan had any visibility into the nerve gas things. I already mentioned they would do things, starve people or dehydrate people. And then again, these are that they do vivisections, and they would take them. So Steph's already saying, holy F on this, just wait. I'm I'm barely getting to the things they did, and they do some sick stuff. So they would starve people, they would dehydrate people, and then go ahead and do vivisections. I should have said that earlier, that they would do that with the disease studies. So the plague, the cholera, they would see how they would do it at varying degrees. So let's say they would infect, 10 men with the plague, and then maybe, day one, they would cut one of them open. Day two, they would cut somebody else open, and they would see how it progressed and what it would do to the different organs in the body. Keep in mind, too, these were all done. They basically tied them down and put a rag in their mouth and cut them open while they were alive and totally conscious, and did this because they didn't want anything else to interfere with any medicine or anything to interfere with the results of the experiments. So so this goes on. Well, there was a lot of horrible things in World War II, Mary Beth, their faith in humanity. Like, I'm not saying that there isn't horrible things, but World War II, if you really get into and study all the different things that happened, like that to a lot of degree may have been our lowest point. I think we've dreamed up worse things since then, but actually haven't done them. It's pretty bad stuff. All right. They would, the starvation, dehydration, they would put people in low pressure chambers and drop the pressure to see how long it would take before their eyes would pop out of their head, how long it would take before they would explode, how long it would take before they would just die, just, varying. They would vary how fast the pressure dropped. The time when the pressure dropped would take people out at different spots. And yeah, I'm sorry. I was reading what Carr said. You want to be poisoned, then put up with this torture and evil. Well, wait. I'm just going to add again. This gets all to the point. Mary Beth, your faith in humanity might get even worse as we get farther down this. But they also then did experiments and research on burns. So varying temperatures, varying times, varying locations on the body, and see what impacts different temperatures, different heat sources would have on burns on the body. And so, and again, they would evaluate all this and go through. And again, I hate to say, just wide range of these aren't just soldiers. Not that it makes it that much different. These aren't just soldiers that they're doing. They're doing this to a wide range of people that they could capture. They would hang people upside down to see how long it would take them to die. They would keep people outside to see how long it would take them to freeze to death. I almost hate to even repeat this one. To talk about this, I'd known this as they did an experiment with infants to see how long it would take infants to freeze to death. So they took a whole bunch of infants and put them outside and saw it. They would take people and crush them with heavy objects, doing different crushing studies to see the effects on the body of crushing injuries. They did different electrocution experiments. So Carson, yeah, these are scientists. This is a science lab. These are science trained people. Doctors, biologists, like doing this all, and they're documenting all this stuff. Like, this isn't just, some of it's just sadistic, but they show like copies of some of the notes and things. They like documented all this stuff as experiments. They would do different electrocution experiments. So you can just think about, I didn't get details on this, but once again, you can think about, how much voltage over lengths of time through different areas, that kind of stuff. They did electrocution experiments. They dehydrated people with hot fans. So put them in a room with just heated fans and see how long it would take to dehydrate their bodies. They did this one. They spun people to death in centrifuges. So they put them in centrifuges and did different studies on, I guess, time and speed, but they would just spin them around in centrifuge until their body died. And again, they would cut open the body and do all kinds of measurements and take data on the organs and what happened to the organs. They did lots of experiments on injecting animal blood into people and seeing what would happen. And for whatever reason, they seem to have, I never found out the exact reason why they spent so much time on this one, but they did lots of research around horse blood and what would happen if horse blood was injected into human beings. They did radiation and X-ray experiments, so exposing to different levels of radiation, different levels of X-rays. I think it was primarily X-rays, to see again how long it would take to kill someone, what would be the damage to the organs, what would be the damage to the tissues as they would go through all these pieces. Then they did all these things also with chemical weapons. So as I had mentioned already, mustard gas, cyanide gas, agents that are tear gas agents. So, sneeze. There's one that's referred to as like a sneezing gas. I think it's Adamsite. Tear gas. They said, excuse me, there's one eyewitness that I read. They saw they put a guy in, I think it was, he was in naked in a, like a phone booth. And then they just pumped the sneezing gas in there. And, he was just gagging, choking, having a horrible, and then the person left, couldn't watch any more of it. But they would do all kinds of weird experiments like this. They did, and they did experiments where they took water, and I guess they bubbled mustard gas into the water and then forced people to drink it and see what it did to their insides. They did experiments with, there was one detailed one where we saw where they took different groups of people at different distances from the mustard gas and had them, one group had certain types of different gas masks. One group was just in military uniforms, but no gas masks. And then another group was basically had no clothes, and they would go ahead and do the mustard gas attacks and see what the varying damage was to the bodies, how bad the burns went, how all those different things. So pretty gross stuff. I don't know. This is one where I don't see any. Again, these are all sick, but there was some that I said that don't seem to have any scientific basis at all on it, like the horse blood. They did experiments injecting seawater into people to see. So you can just imagine. Well, if you don't know this from biology, osmosis, water will flow to kind of balance out salt concentration. So what that would do is something with that much saline in it. Basically, it's just it's more than just sodium chloride, but that's a super salt solution getting put into your bloodstream. What that would do is it would cause all the water in your cells to get pushed out to try to dilute that salt. So it would basically your cells would just all kind of wither away, and just so it would be pulling all the water out of the cells and do a lot of damage. I guess that's probably why they sick, but why they wanted to do that. This kind of goes to the burn experiments I said earlier, but they did experiments burning people alive, and then doing measurements. They would bury people alive, and then do measurements. Mary Beth, I know this is why I said this was one of the ones that I said, like, if any place is haunted on the planet, this place has got to be haunted. No, they know exactly where this is. There's a museum there right now. It's in China. It's in Harbin, I believe. It's in Harbin, China. The main building's still standing. You can look it up on the internet. It's still sitting up there. They have a museum in it now. This has stayed quiet. China has been talking about this for decades, but it has only maybe last 30 years been acknowledged. Steph, this started in like 36, 37. And went all the way to the end of World War II. So about a 10-year time frame, 36, 37 to 45. They did all kinds of, I wanted to look this one up and I forgot. Darn it. There's two of these here that I'm not familiar with. They did different poisoning. So ingestion, probably injection, different routes and things. Things that they did poisoning studies on was pufferfish venom, heroin, Korean bindweed. That was the one I have to look up. I don't know what that is. Bactyl. And then there's another one you'll know and you'll see from the news. And again, I think a lot of the information comes from this. Ricin. So they would expose people to these and then start cutting them up and looking. Well, Christine, you're going to get to. I hate where this is going to go because this goes to a really really bad place, even worse than where I'm at now. But it's one of those that the news should get this information should get out here as to what happened. So we'll get there. I already mentioned this earlier, but they do blood draining experiments. So a HICIL, where they would remove a certain amount of blood every day from somebody and then measure what would happen to them. They did, and this probably is the source of some information as well that's out there medically. They did experiments on blood transfusions with different blood types. So, and I did see a little grid where they would show then that, about the universal donor, universal receptor. So, they had like a B patient that received AB blood and nothing happened. They had an O patient that received A blood and they recovered, but they spiked a high fever and were sick for a couple of days. And so they did these experiments of mixing blood types and doing things. I already covered the chemical weapons. They did a lot of work with frostbite. So it's pretty sick. They froze limbs by different ways. And then they would sometimes they would beat the frozen limb to cause extra damage to it. And then they would thaw the limb by different methods and then see how this flesh would recover. So they would freeze limbs, let them thaw naturally. They would freeze limbs, thaw them in hot water, thaw them in cold water. As disgusting as it sounds, they would thaw them with flames, probably tied to the burning experiments. And so they did all kinds of frostbite experiments as well to see what would happen. Then finally, this is nasty as well, so it doesn't get better here. They did lots of experimentation with venereal diseases and particularly syphilis. And so at first they were doing injections and then again doing these vivisections to see what would happen over time. This is also where I said the only people that would live for any length of time in this camp would be pregnant women, because they would do studies, and this is one of the ones they would do studies to see what would happen to the babies over time. No, Mary Beth, it's not. So I think that was, so some of this it wasn't all for Mary Beth asking how they justify freezing someone. I don't think it was all done for weapons research, but it was done for, so if you're working in a Arctic environment, how is the best way to treat frostbite? How's the best way to recover? I'm not saying this is all done that way. I mean, some of this was just sadistic stuff, but I think that was the useful information they were going to try to glean from that was how to recover frozen limbs in a military type piece. So that's where that was coming from. So then they found out that it wasn't working as well that way. So they kept people that were already infected with syphilis or gonorrhea. I think that was our cat upstairs making noise. And then they would do forced, basically rapes or sex to infect people. And so they were infecting them with venereal diseases that way. And then again, measuring and doing different tests and doing tests on the babies and again, I'll say it again, nobody, including the children that were born here, there's no documented survivor from this place. So as far as we know, anyone that ever went to Unit 731 died. It wasn't like some of the death camps in Germany where they were like liberating people, that got in there and made it out. Nobody made it out of here. Yeah, Mary Beth, they heard the crash upstairs. I think that was the cat making noise. So now we get to the really disturbing stuff. So why don't we know about it? Why? Where'd some of this information go? Well, when shortly after World War II ended, it was already starting to be kind of a push between less of us worrying about Germany, less than us worrying about Japan. And Monica, it gets worse depending on how you want to look at this. Yeah, my daughter, we at one of their works, there was a cat that was like stuck outside, and so she kind of adopted it. And I'm a softie, so it's not really my cat, but yes, we have a cat in the mix now too. This is not. Wait, there's more. Yeah, this is. I think this is. No, this is just disturbing. I don't know if it's more or less disturbing than the experiments. It's just what was done. So there was a shift. U.S. and Soviet Union realizing that they're now going to start to become the enemies. And so Zero Ishii realized the only way he's getting out of this is to try to cut a deal. And so folks from that location, both in the Soviet Union, although U.S. and Soviet Union did a lot of finger pointing afterwards, but they both took this. But more of it went to the U.S., as far as I know. They cut a deal that we'll share all our human experiment data because, again, it's illegal to do it. You're not going to be able. And they have information on this, which I totally forgot. So I'm sorry. Part of this went to vaccine development. So the Japanese were able to come up with pretty effective treatments for some of these things like smallpox. Who knows? Maybe the whole fact that smallpox is eradicated, not that I'm trying to give anything positive to this, was from some of the things they did from this. But that was one of the main benefits, was the disease treatment information was pretty valuable that came out of this all. So they cut deals on both sides. It's just the U.S. got more because the U.S. conquered most of Japan. The Soviet Union jumped in very, very late and grabbed like a couple islands to the north and did things. But so it was U.S. was the main ones on this. So the main deal was cut with the U.S. Turned over all the data. So we got the data. Some other folks got arrested in the Soviet Union, and they gave them data. So the Soviet Union got some of the data too. And basically, they got immunity for exchange for the data. And not only did they get immunity, but a lot of these guys ended up heading up major companies in Japan. So no prison, no repercussions on that front. And they ended up being executives in some of the major corporations in Japan. Now, Japan has kept this quiet, obviously, for a very, very long time. There's actually a documentary you can find on YouTube of a academic in Japan that was working on kind of uncovering this. China, ever since, even before the war, has been, screaming about that. This is just one element of Japan and what they did in China in World War II. There's more, like we get it. We'll do a show in the future on Nanking, but there's a bunch of other things on here. That is the whole source of, if you ever hear about kind of animosity, I shouldn't say the whole source of, but that is a main root cause of animosity between those two countries because of all these things that Japan did some pretty brutal things in China during that time. And this was actually one of them. And honestly, they had bad bubonic plague outbreaks for decades afterwards. I think the last one might have been in like the late 60s, early 70s. And it is likely that, again, this was all kept hush-hush. But it's likely that these were offshoots of those genetically modified fleas that were creating those outbreaks, because they were very much more deadly than the normal plague outbreaks. So we took the data and used that to, help develop medical treatment. So, the one nugget, I'm not trying to put a positive spin on any of this, but there is likely, as awful as it sounds, treatments, including probably like the frostbite thing and knowledge on blood transfusions. And so there's likely things that got implemented into the medical system that advanced medical knowledge, even though this was done in a very, very sick way. And we certainly took those learnings into our own weapons programs as well. I think that's why a lot of those ones that I named are things that are still considered bioweapons or chemical weapons. The reason why ricin is considered a effective weapon is because more than likely because of this research. And then, all the explosions. So sadly, it advanced not only did it advance medical treatments, but it advanced the ability to develop weapons to maximize damage to the human body because of all these, tying people to posts and exploiting ordinances and seeing what it would do. And so, but yes, they. Oh no, that's why. Well, the U.S. went. You can't. All the studies. It's awful. I mean, I feel bad even saying it, but I mean, things are done on animals. There's not. So this is there was all this human data, and so it got exchanged for letting those guys go, and they went go. Zero Ishii lived a very, very long life. I forget exactly when he died now, but he didn't die young. And a lot of these guys, as I said, I don't want to name the specific companies in case I get it wrong, but you can think of major companies in Japan, and because basically, how a lot of the businesses there go, there's big companies that have lots of stuff under their umbrella. A lot of these scientists and doctors and things went on and had very long careers there. And so that is one of the big reasons why, as much as you hear about what went on in Europe, you don't hear much about this. And honestly, it is a little bit of a sore spot, as you can understand. China doesn't appreciate this, particularly when you see kind of how the comparison from the two continents and how things were handled. You can certainly, whether it is racist or not, you can certainly play a racist card as to why all these things were done in response to what Germany did versus basically being hush hush and kind of cutting this deal with what was done to the Chinese. So, Mary Beth, the Tuskegee experiment, was probably the closest, at least out of the things that have been declassified and we know of, that the U.S. got to doing something similar to that. And there is a little bit of a time overlap, I think, on that one. I mean, it went all the way to the 70s, but I think it started around the same time. You got to also remember this time frame, pre-World War II, and at least a little bit past, that whole eugenics was a very big. I mean, that's partially why that whole master race and things came up. There was this whole the whole idea of genetics and being able to breed in, breed out certain aspects and things. That was like a hot topic at that time. And there were some pretty weird theories and things that were actually fairly mainstream at the time, out and about, not just U.S. I'm saying just in general out there at the time. And that, I think, fueled some of these weird kind of things that went on too. They also did it. It's sad. They also did it to, this always, all of this should hit a soft spot. So, and it all does, but they also did it to disable the Unit 731. They did it to disabled people. So lots of crazy stuff. I'll pause a little bit here to see if anybody's got any other questions on this. But again, this ranks up. I would have to say I have a bunch of shows lined up to kind of cover these since everyone asks about what are some locations you would consider really major haunted ones. And I said there's a whole list that you don't necessarily hear about because there's some sensitive things to it. This is probably a top 5. If I had to say, if I was given a huge budget or just the ability to go anywhere and be told, Matt, we'll give you 3 spots and X amount of months, go try to get the best documentation you can that there is something else out there related to hauntings. This would definitely be a finalist. This is definitely like a top 5, and I would guess. I don't know, I have to go through them all. There's some other ones that we're going to cover, but this would easily make the top 3, and I'm thinking this is probably the number 1. If there's a spot haunted anywhere in the world, I'm thinking this place, between the just the horrible traumatic energy and all the things that happened there. And then you also think about somebody that has a story to tell. All these people were silenced. They're plucked off the street. Nobody knew whatever happened to them. So when you add all those different pieces together, I think if there is anywhere where there's like a spiritual energy that would want their story told and be known that they're there, it would be this place. So how'd this all get uncovered? Well, see, this is why he cut the deal, because he figured it was only a matter of time before this would all get out. Some of it was China. China knew about it, and so they were raising the flag for a long time. And then some of it was research from, I know this one academic in Japan did a lot of research on this. And there were folks digging into this for a very long time. It just doesn't get, well, even now, I mean, how many people, you still bring this up and compare it to like Auschwitz, like there's still like hardly anybody knows this story. It's I would say deliberately not advertised. So it's, folks find out about it and then start speaking up about it. And that's kind of how this is played. And it doesn't paint our country in a good light. So, it's not necessarily looked favorably upon if you go ahead and broadcast this everywhere. And honestly, I'm trying to be fair and get this out here from the haunted piece, but also because I think it's, in fairness, it's a story that needs to be known. But it obviously makes our, a country that is not friendly to us, puts them in a much better light and us in a worse light. So I'm sure there's some, super patriotic folks that would probably rather we don't talk about this. But yeah. Mary Beth says she has an idea, but she forgot about it. Yeah. So there's so yeah, that's how some of this. I can share some more. I'll do a little more looking on the who actually blew the whistle on it. I'm drawing a blank on. There's a lot of good. I very intentionally don't share like pictures and video, but there's a lot of good stuff out there on this. You can actually do some research into. If you want to look up Unit 731, there is actually a lot of stuff out there on the internet on it. It just doesn't get publicized. And there was one really good documentary, and I want to say it was a professor in Tokyo, and he took a lot of crap because Japan in particular didn't really want to readily admit this, let alone that all the people got, basically got executive jobs afterwards and walked away from it. Mary Beth's asking if I saw the footage from the concentration. Yes, and I actually saw a documentary years ago from, it was very interesting, but very, very sad, a Soviet footage from some of the ones that they came in to liberate. And yeah, very, 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 very sick, very, very sad. I didn't see it in schools, but I have seen it. Yeah, and it's just, I don't know, it's weird. It's just, I find it interesting too, the difference, mass killings in both cases, but the difference in what, again, kind of what was done Germany versus Japan with this. And I know Germany did their experiments too, and they were doing lots, again, that eugenics thing was a big thing. So they were doing lots of stuff with twins and weird things. But when you look at the scale, the level of experiments and things done in Europe, there was way more industrial just killing in what was being done in Europe than the weird sick experiments that were going on compared to this place. And it's sick. And but anyway, there's no other final questions or anything on this. I will let you guys go. We are going to do a show. I'm planning on doing a show next week. Unless I hear from everybody that they don't want to, because it is Mother's Day. So I'm always kind of on the fence on that one. 2 weeks from now, I will not have a show. I'm going to be out of town. So there will be no show on the 17th. But we'll do one next week. I just haven't decided on which topic yet. And then one of the later weeks in May, I have to go back and look and see which one it is. But one of either the 24th or the I'm sorry, the 22nd or the 29th, we're going to have Nancy Matz back on and do the part 2 of the possession show. So I hope you enjoyed this. I know it's kind of a disturbing topic, but I do feel it's important to kind of get it out there. These particularly get these people's stories told. Even though we don't know the specifics of a lot of the people, they ended up being, again, they were referred to as logs. So probably even in the data and things, there's probably no name or anything. It was probably just like, log 35 and stuff like that. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and I will talk to you all soon. Take care.